This is the story of how lead, the poison, might have helped make humans smart. In October of 2025, a team of scientists published a study with a genuinely bold claim sitting at the center of it, arguing that millions of years of lead exposure shaped the way our brains evolved and that one tiny genetic accident protected us while it may have doomed the Neanderthals. Let me be straight with you up front. This is a hypothesis and a contested one, but the data underneath it gets strange enough that it earns a careful walkthrough. Most people picture lead poisoning as old Roman water pipes, leaded gasoline, or paint flaking off the wall of some run-down building, which makes it feel like a purely modern mess. Scientists leaned that way too for a long time, assuming serious lead exposure only entered the human story in recorded history. That assumption is exactly what this study blows apart, dragging the timeline back almost 2 million years. The detective work behind this is clever. An international team examined 51 fossilized teeth pulled from sites across Africa, Asia, and Europe, with ages stretching from roughly 1.8 million years old all the way down to 100,000 years old. Early humans were only part of the picture because the same analysis swept in Neanderthals, ancient ancestors like Australopithecus, Africanus, and Paranthropus robustus, and even a giant extinct ape called Gigantopithecus blacki, which is about as close as the real world ever came to King Kong. Here is why the method matters. Teeth grow in layers, much like the rings of a tree, and every layer traps a chemical record of whatever that individual encountered while it formed. To read those layers one by one, the researchers fired ultra-fine lasers across the enamel in a technique called high-precision laser-ablation geochemistry, decoding the record locked inside. The numbers caught them off guard. Lead turned up in 73% of every fossil studied, and among the human and human relative samples specifically, 71% carried contamination. The single highest exposure of anything they tested belonged to that King Kong ape, Gigantopithecus blacki, in fossils dating back 1.8 million years. Geochemist Renaud Joans-Boyau, the study's lead author, framed the result in a way that lands hard. If a living person walked in with that much lead in their body, he explained, he would assume they'd been hammered by industrial or man-made exposure. Here's the part that breaks your brain, though. There was no industry. None of this happened anywhere near a factory because the clock reads 1.8 million years ago, which raises the obvious problem of where all that lead actually came from. Factories are off the table, so the researchers point instead toward natural sources, things like soil, volcanic dust, and contaminated water. Corresponding author Alison Moatri, a neuroscientist at UC San Diego, floated one specific scenario, suggesting our ancestors went hunting for caves with running water inside, and since caves hold lead, every one of those water sources turned toxic. Worse still, the tooth enamel hints that the exposure kicked in extraordinarily early, all the way back in infancy. That timing is everything. Infancy is the precise window when lead inflicts the deepest damage on a developing brain. A glaring contradiction sits right here. Lead corrodes the brain, drags down intelligence, and wrecks emotional regulation. So if our ancestors marinated in the stuff for 2 million years, the obvious puzzle is how we wound up intelligent at all. This is where the study turns genuinely interesting and, fair warning, genuinely speculative. Because the researchers pin their answer on one single gene called NOVA1. Acting as a master regulator of brain development, NOVA1 carries a detail that turns out to be the whole story. Almost every modern human walks around with a version of it that differs from the Neanderthal version by exactly one base pair of DNA, a single letter buried in the entire genome. To figure out what that lone letter does, the team grew brain organoids, which are pea-sized clumps of lab-grown brain tissue, miniature brains in other words. 2 batches went under the microscope, one built with the modern human NOVA1 and one with the ancient Neanderthal variant, and both were dosed with small, realistic amounts of lead, the kind ancient humans plausibly ran into. The modern gene organoids shrugged off the lead far better than the ancient ones. Everything about the two batches was identical except for that single variant, Mutri explained, which let the team ask whether the one mutation dividing us from Neanderthals was quietly handing us an edge. The edge turned out to be language. A famous gene called FOXP2 governs speech, and people carrying certain FOXP2 mutations struggle to assemble complex words and sentences. Here's the twist that makes this whole thing click. FOXP2 is identical in humans and Neanderthals, the exact same gene in both, yet Lee disrupted it only in the organoids running the ancient Nova-1 variant. As Mutri put it, the neurons tied to complex language are vulnerable to death in that archaic version of the gene. So the dividing line was never the language gene itself, it was the regulator sitting one level above it. And the fact that nearly every human alive carries this one variant tells the researchers something heavy. Because in Muatri's words, if all humans share this newer mutation in every corner of the world, then enormous genetic pressure must have selected for it across our species. Strip the theory down and the headline reads like this: "Lead saturated the ancient world and poisoned brains everywhere. But modern humans carried a kind of genetic shield over the circuitry for complex language while Neanderthals carried nothing of the sort. That communication edge translated into social cohesion and survival for us." And Muatri pushes the idea further, speculating it may have helped drive the Neanderthals into extinction around 40,000 years ago. Language is where he plants his flag. He calls it transformational, our superpower, the thing that lets us organize society, trade ideas, and coordinate enormous movements of people. And as he points out, no evidence suggests the Neanderthals could pull off anything like that. Here's the thing though, not everyone buys it, and I promised you honesty up front. Shara Bailey, a biological anthropologist at NYU who specializes in ancient teeth, tipped her hat to the idea and called it a creative hypothesis. Yet she landed somewhere blunt, admitting the evidence doesn't really convince her at this stage. Her sticking point is that the study never clearly demonstrates the exposure struck in early childhood, which, again, is the exact window when lead matters most. Tanya Smith, an evolutionary biologist at Griffith University, pushed harder still. She branded it a really complex paper making some highly speculative claims, and she flagged that the limited number and type of fossils simply can't prove our ancestors faced consistent lead exposure across 2 million years. A fair logical objection sits underneath all of it too. If lead truly blanketed everything, the awkward question is why it sank the Neanderthals but spared us. The study's answer circles right back to that Nova-1 shield, which happens to be the very claim still up for debate. So did this poison make humans smart? The honest verdict is a heavily qualified maybe. We know lead lingered in our ancestors' teeth for close to 2 million years. We know modern humans carry a one-letter genetic change that protected brain tissue from lead in the lab, especially the parts wired for language, and we know language stands among our defining superpowers. What stays unresolved is whether that entire chain genuinely played out across evolution, or whether it's a gorgeous story the evidence can't quite hold up. And even the researchers concede more work is needed. One detail refuses to leave my head, though. When the team scanned teeth from people born between the 1940s and the 1970s, the peak years of leaded gasoline and lead paint, those modern teeth echoed the patterns sitting in ancient fossils. For one brief stretch, industrial humanity managed to recreate the exact toxic exposure our ancestors endured for 2 million years. We clawed lead out of our daily lives over decades because we finally grasped how dangerous it is. And yet this study leaves a strange, almost uncomfortable possibility hanging in the air that the very same poison may have been quietly sculpting who we became the entire time. If that idea rattles around your skull the way it rattles around mine, drop a comment and let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.